Sharks are one of the most feared creatures on the planet, but in prehistoric times, sharks were much more scary. Millions of years ago, there was a species of shark that was not only the biggest and most powerful hunter that the Earth has ever seen, but also the most ruthless and terrifying. So join me for today's video. We're going to count down 15 amazing facts about the Megalodon shark. Number 15. Their size. Despite knowing about the huge monsters that once roamed our planet, it's amazing to think that the largest creature of all that we know of is still swimming in the oceans today, the blue whale. They, however, feed solely on minuscule creatures like plankton that they filter out from the seawater, so they aren't really considered to be deadly predators. When talking about animals that are at the top of the food chain, the Megalodon was in a league of its own, and not only was it the largest apex predator that we know of right now, but it makes the ones of today seem tiny in comparison. Experts believe that megalodons were able to grow to lengths of up to 60 or 70 feet. That's about 18 to 22 meters, and when they were this size, they probably weighed more than 60 tons. To put this into a little bit of context, this made them similar in length to that of a sperm whale, but much heavier, and they'd have easily been able to take on anything else in the ocean at that time. Great white sharks, which are generally seen as the top predators of the oceans right now, only grow to a length of around 23 feet or about 7 meters and weigh 3.5 tons, meaning megalodons would have been 3 times longer and 20 times heavier. They even dwarf the largest of the marine reptiles that were around during the times of the dinosaurs, but there remains a debate as to quite how giant they could become. Shark cartilage doesn't really fossilize as well as the bones from other animals, so the best researchers can do is estimate their size based on the teeth that have been found. It is possible that in the right circumstances, individual megalodons could have grown substantially larger than these estimates, and there have been no other animals capable of standing up to them. It makes you glad that Megalodon aren't still around today, because if they were, they'd be the second largest creatures in the ocean, and there's not a single other species that would be able to fend them off. Number 14. Their hunting technique. Without any living megalodon to study, it can be difficult to know for certain how they hunted their prey, but based on fossil evidence and learning about how today's sharks behave, researchers have determined a series of frighteningly effective behaviors that megalodons may have used to incapacitate and devour their food. The first, of course, was by utilizing their powerful bite and their teeth. They wouldn't have feared many other creatures in the ocean and likely saw everything else as potential prey. For those that were too big, the megalodon would have taken as large a bite as they could into their flesh. This wouldn't have necessarily killed their target immediately, but they would have followed them around as long as it took for their victim to weaken to the point where it couldn't resist the attack any longer, and the megalodon could simply eat it alive. For those that were small enough, the meg would have taken one bite and swallowed them whole in an instant. There is evidence, too, that the monstrous sharks had teeth that were particularly suited to biting through cartilage, so instead of targeting soft tissue as the great white does, they would have also begun to attack by tearing through their prey's fins, which would have left them unable to swim away so the megalodon could go in for the kill. This is a technique that some modern-day sharks have been seen to do, but while they're only effective against fish that are much smaller than them, Megalodon would have been powerful enough to tear through these targets that were the same size as themselves. Essentially, they were so powerful that they had a range of options as to how to consume their food, and unless a fish was either too quick or too strong for a megalodon to strike, there was no stopping them. Number 13. Their name. You probably know them as Megalodon or even Meg, but this is just the name that's been adopted in popular media as a shorthand for these gigantic monsters that once roamed the oceans. It is a fairly good descriptor, though, because it roughly translates to mean giant tooth. But scientists have actually for a long time been undecided as to what the animals should be called, because there's still a degree of uncertainty where they fit in the natural world. Scientific names for animals are made up of the genus first, and then their species names second. It's not entirely clear, though, whether the megalodon belonged to the extinct genus Carcharocles, or the genus Carcharodon, which has one living member that's still around today, the great white shark. Most, however, believe that it should instead be classified into its own genus, though, which would mean its full name is Carcharocles megalodon. But even this can be slightly confusing. There's a species of fossil bivalves that lived during the late Jurassic period, and their genus name is Megalodon too, because they also had giant teeth in relation to the size of their bodies. Of course, if you were ever to see both these creatures in real life, there'd be no mistaking which one is which. Number 12. Their nurseries. There are lots of animals that are left to fend for themselves as soon as they're born, and this is the case for most shark species, but not all of them. Some, like great white and hammerheads, will only give birth to their young in safe, shallow waters where predators are far less likely to attack, and these places are referred to by biologists as nurseries. Often, the young sharks will stay in these protected areas for many months or even years before venturing out into the open ocean. But this isn't a new behavior for sharks because there are indications that megalodons used to do it too. The evidence for this comes from a fossil site in Panama where an unusually large concentration of small megalodon teeth have been found. Most of them appear to have come from individuals that were between 7 to 35 feet or about 2 to 11 meters long, which would certainly suggest this was a safe place where they remained as they were growing up. There's another site in the Bone Valley region of Florida that seems to have been used in the same way, and this was vital for the continuation of the species. While Megalodon would have had nothing to fear when they were fully grown, there were plenty of predators that would have made quick work of the juvenile ones. This would have drastically reduced the chances of individuals reaching adulthood and prevented the species from being so dominant, so giving birth in nurseries was the perfect solution. It's further believed that several adult megalodon would have remained around the nurseries to guard the youngsters and probably patrolled the border of the shallow harbors to prevent potential predators from getting anywhere close. Number 11. Their teeth. Not only were megalodons the largest predators to have ever lived, but they also grew some of the most deadly teeth of any creature that's ever been discovered. They're the one part of these giant sharks that preserve well, and some specimens have been found that are more than 7.5 inches or 19 centimeters long. This makes the 3-inch or 7.5 centimeter great white shark teeth seem tiny in comparison, and suggests that a megalodon's jaw could have been up to 7 feet or 2.5 meters across, meaning they could have eaten you sideways if they wanted to. While many fossils are quite rare to find, megalodon teeth are actually pretty common. Each individual would have grown tens of thousands of them during their lifetime and shed them in a way similar to how modern-day sharks do. In fact, at any one time, they had 276 teeth across 5 rows, so each one could be replaced in a matter of days if it was damaged. This means that they're often found on beaches and in fossil deposits around the world, and it only takes a quick search online to find a place where you can buy one for yourself. As anyone who has held one in their hand will know, it soon becomes obvious that when they're in the mouth of a megashark, the teeth would have had serrated edges and were incredibly sharp. This would have enabled the megalodon to easily bite chunks of flesh out of even the largest of prey, so even if they couldn't eat them in one go, they would cause enough damage that all they'd have to do is follow them around until they were too weak to put up much of a fight. Number 10. Inspiring modern science. The connection between the scientific study of geology and the gigantic megalodon is perhaps a surprise, but if it wasn't for these mega sharks, we may not have learned as much of the old world as we now know. Centuries ago, on the island of Malta, which is in the Mediterranean Sea, locals collected particular teeth scattered along the beaches. Unbeknownst to them, these were the remnants of the fearsome megalodon, but their curiosity led them to collect as many as they could. In those times of limited knowledge about prehistoric times, the islanders called these fossils glossopetrae, meaning tongue stones. The scholar Pliny the Elder even made mention of them, offering fanciful explanations, suggesting they fell from the heavens during eclipses or were born from the curses of St. Paul upon the island's serpents. Little did they know the true significance of these fossils in shaping the foundations of modern geology. It wasn't until 1666 when a physician from Florence came into possession of a shark's head for dissection that the truth began to unfurl. Upon examining the creature's teeth, he had a breakthrough moment when he realized their resemblance to the mysterious glossopetrae. He pondered the processes through which these teeth became so deeply embedded within the surrounding rock layers, and this line of thought gave birth to the earliest theories of rock formations and gave rise to stratigraphy, which is the study of layers upon layers that comprise the Earth's crust. His contributions to the field earned him the distinguished title of Father of Stratigraphy, and through his observations and subsequent investigations, the world of geology began to unravel the mysteries of the Earth's history, revealing vast spans of time and the dynamic forces shaping our planet. In essence, the ancient megalodon, once an apex predator of the seas, unwittingly became a catalyst for knowledge, sparking the evolution of geology as a fundamental scientific field. today, as we continue to find the ancient teeth that once belonged to this incredible creature, we also tread in the footsteps of those who laid the bedrock of geological understanding, forever linking the past to the present and paving the way for future discoveries. Number 9. When they lived. The fanciful idea that at some point in history there were epic battles between the colossal Megalodon and the fearsome T-Rex might make for a great story, but unfortunately it would have never happened. The creatures, though both incredibly powerful ones, roamed the Earth in vastly different time periods, meaning their paths would have never crossed. Megalodons were, though, living in the Earth's oceans for 20 million years, firmly establishing themselves as the apex predators of the marine world. Surprisingly, around until relatively recently in terms of life on Earth, and were around until just 2.6 million years ago during the Pliocene era. This time frame places them in a much more recent time frame compared to any species of dinosaur, but still long before the first humans began emerging. Even after their disappearance from the Earth's waters, the Megalodon's legacy endures in the uncanny resemblance shared by several present-day shark species. The process of their evolution and what their predecessors were does remain a mystery, but while nature decided they themselves were no longer able to survive, a number of their traits have been passed on to new species that have endured to this day. So the story of the Megalodon serves as a reminder of the ebb and flow of life on Earth. Species rise and fall, shaped by the ever-changing forces of the planet, and while they are now extinct, they were around for far longer than we currently have been. Number 8. Their bite. The Megalodon can lay claim to being the biggest shark and predator that's ever lived on the planet, and it's best known for having the largest and sharpest teeth of any species that's been discovered. But to add to how terrifying they must have been, they're also believed to have an extremely strong bite force, one that was possibly even more powerful than that of the T-Rex. Of course, this is just a theory because neither of those animals are around anymore, and to try to work out the answer, a research group was set up that inputted everything we know about the Megalodon into a predictive computer model. By adding the jaw and tooth size, as well as the same details of animals that are around today, such as the great white shark that we know far more about, they can infer the same statistics about the Megalodon. When they ran the numbers, the resulting prediction was that the Megalodon's bite force was somewhere in the region between 24,000 and 40,000 pounds per square inch, which basically would be enough to chew through a small car. This would make it the most powerful bite of any creature in history to have been studied in this way, and eclipses the 8,000 pounds of force that a T-Rex is believed to have had. This, of course, is an estimate, but it would make sense for the Megalodon to need a bite as powerful as this. Many of the other marine life at the time was covered in thick scales to protect against predators, and one of the reasons why Megalodon was able to become so dominant was the species' ability to rip through these defenses. This may also hint to why they're no longer around, because it would have required a huge amount of energy to maintain the strength required to do this. If the availability and size of prey began to reduce, then there'd been no evolutionary need to retain this strength. Great whites are, for example, much less powerful, but they still have more than enough bite force to hunt virtually anything else that's living in the oceans today. Moving on to number 7, their competition. Even though Megalodon were the largest predators of their time and in history, this doesn't mean that they were the only terrifying monsters in the water. They existed during a period when there was plenty of food available, so there were countless other deadly creatures that they had to compete with for food. These include somewhere between an estimated 10 to 60 other species of megatooth sharks, such as the Chubatensis that had 5-inch or 12.5 centimeter teeth and grew to more than 20 feet or 6 meters long. If they had been alive today, they'd certainly be contenders for the deadliest sharks, but in comparison to the Megalodon, they wouldn't have been much of a match. Surprisingly though, the biggest competition to the Megalodon was probably a giant species of carnivorous sperm whale. The Leviathan melvillei, named after the author of Moby Dick, grew to up to 60 feet or 18 meters long like sperm whales do today. But this one had rows of huge, sharp teeth, some of which were 5 inches or 13 centimeters wide and 14 inches or 35 centimeters long. The first fossils of this species date back to around 12 million years ago, and they've been found in some of the same fossil deposits as Megalodon teeth. It's therefore more than likely that the two animals would have faced off against each other and competed for the same prey. And the melvillei was probably the only other creature in the ocean that the Megalodon would have been cautious around. A fully grown adult megalodon would have been able to fend for itself against anything else in the ocean, but things would have been a lot tougher for the juveniles. During this stage of their life, they'd have been preyed upon by other sharks and the leviathan among others, and this would have been a much more even matchup. Number 6. Their diet. The diet of the megalodon, as the all-powerful apex predator of the ancient seas, shows just how ferocious and dominant they were. As one of the largest carnivorous creatures to ever exist, they held a position at the top of the marine food chain and would have been able to overcome anything that they encountered. Megalodons are believed to have primarily fed on a menu consisting of large marine mammals, making them an example of a mammal-eating shark or macropredator. Their prey included a diverse array of sea creatures, such as prehistoric seals, giant turtles, and likely baleen whales that are also known to have been alive at the time. Given their immense size and the need to consume substantial quantities of food, they likely targeted the largest marine animals they could find to sustain their massive bodies and maintain their position as the ultimate predator. Fossil evidence and bite marks on various marine remains have offered crucial insights into the megalodon's diet. These enormous creatures possessed formidable jaws equipped with rows of large triangular teeth, as they were ideally suited for grasping and tearing through the flesh of their prey. Scratch marks and fractures have been found on fossilized whale bones that were likely victims of a megalodon attack. The abundance of marine mammals during the megalodon's reign likely played a pivotal role in sustaining its population. In the warm, shallow seas of the Miocene and Pliocene epochs, the megalodon's favored prey would have thrived in vast numbers. Additionally, ocean currents and migrations of marine mammals likely created natural feeding opportunities for these giant predators. They wouldn't, though, had to have eaten too often, and assuming that megalodons were fairly similar to modern-day sharks, they would have only needed to eat about every 2 weeks. Great whites, for example, can survive for around 15 days after a single meal of about 66 pounds or 30 kilograms of whale blubber. So while the megalodon would have certainly required more than this because of their larger size, they certainly wouldn't have needed to hunt every day. Number 5. Where they lived. During the 20 million year period that megalodons were alive on the planet, conditions were very different from what we experience today. It was much warmer, and this means the oceans would have provided suitable conditions for megalodons all over the world. This is backed up by the fossil record, as the megalodon remains have been found around every continent on Earth, apart from Antarctica. It's likely then that anywhere that was deep enough and where temperatures were between 34 to 75 degrees Fahrenheit or 1 to 24 degrees Celsius, it would have been perfectly comfortable for the megalodon and left very few places for their prey to try to hide away from them. This is also something that they differ from greatly in comparison to modern-day species, because megalodon don't seem to have been too picky about where they would go. Fossils have, for example, been found in coastal lagoons, shallower waters near to land, and in the darkest depths of the ocean, and probably swarm between different areas depending on where they were in their life cycle. When needing to hunt gigantic prey, they would have needed to venture into deeper waters, but when giving birth or when still growing to full size, the shallower regions were likely safer from other oceanic dangers and gave them a better chance to reach maturity. Another interesting thing that's been discovered by researchers is that fossilized remains of a megalodon that have been found in the southern hemisphere tend to be larger than those found in the northern. Just why this is the case isn't known, but it's been suggested that the result of the way food sources at the time were distributed throughout the oceans, and possibly due to the fact that there were other large predators in the southern hemisphere that megalodons needed to bulk up in order to remain dominant. Number 4. Their poop. Very few remains, apart from teeth, have ever been found of a megalodon. In one instance, a partial spinal column was discovered that allowed researchers to determine some aspects of their size and structure, but apart from that, there are hardly any clues about the lifestyles of these giant creatures. Quite often, large numbers of fossilized teeth will be found in the same location as each other, either because this was the place used as a nursery, or it was the site of where a large number of them died, or because the currents washed small pieces into the same regions. And occasionally things are found alongside them that could well be associated with the huge sharks themselves. This is what happened during a dig at a site in South Carolina, where hundreds of megalodon teeth were found. Next to them, though, was something incredibly rare, a 5.5-inch or 14-centimeter long lump of fossilized poop that was identified as having come from a large-bodied shark. As it was found alongside so many remnants of megalodon, it makes sense that this is also from the megashark as well. The most peculiar thing about it is that it was spiral-shaped. but this isn't unheard of in the feces of sharks. In fact, the same thing happens with the waste products of great white sharks, and they take on this shape because their lower intestines are twisted around like a corkscrew. While this might sound painful, it is actually a clever adaptation for animals living underwater and helps their bodies expel all the material as efficiently as possible, especially when it may contain hard bone and shell particles. Number 3. The relation to sharks today. When you look at shark species today, there are a number of traits that are similar to those that we know of the Megalodon, and you have to wonder how closely they're related to the monster of the seas. The connections between these creatures continue to intrigue scientists, although the precise extent of their relationship does remain a mystery. Despite certain similarities, though, researchers tend to place the Megalodon in a distinct genus of its own. Amongst the modern-day sharks, the great white is by far the closest relative to the Megalodon. Both exhibit massive mouths adorned with triangular, razor-sharp teeth, and their predatory instincts focused on capturing large marine animals. For a considerable period, the scientific community believed that the Megalodon served as a direct ancestor to the great white shark. However, recent studies have challenged this assumption. The most compelling evidence surfaced during comparisons between fossilized Megalodon teeth and their modern-day equivalents found in great white sharks. Frighteningly, the Megalodon teeth were found to be much sharper and more serrated than those of the great white shark, and in contrast, an ancient species of mako shark, which existed around 6.5 million years ago, displayed teeth more similar to those of the great white. As a result, the current consensus leans towards the great white shark's ancestry being rooted in a species of mako shark rather than the Megalodon. Nevertheless, the limited availability of Megalodon remains for study beyond their teeth prevents us from dismissing the possibility that they could still be ancestral to certain modern-day species. Some researchers have suggested that the adaptability and temperament seen by some species, such as bull sharks, may in part be attributed to the legacy of the Megalodon. Number 2. Their extinction. Based on the fossil record, it appears as if Megalodon went extinct at some point around 2.6 million years ago, and there are a few things that happened around that time that likely combined to make it more and more difficult for them to survive. The first was climate change. Instead of the Earth continually warming, the planet was in a phase where temperatures were gradually falling, and although this was happening at a slow rate, it began having dramatic effects on the marine environment. Undersea currents began to change, which affected where nutrient-rich waters could be found, and increasing amounts of water began to freeze at the ice caps, which resulted in the lowering of sea levels, which blocked off access routes and possibly drained the bays that were being used as nurseries. Other animals too began to die off because of the lack of food sources, and it's likely that baleen whales, which were one of the main components of a megalodon's diet, began to die out. And this would have put huge pressure on the megalodons to search for new sources of food. When large-scale changes like this begin to happen, it's often the biggest animals that die off first. They're the ones that need the most food to survive and are less able to adapt to environmental changes. With a restricting region of water that they could swim in because of falling temperatures and a greatly reduced food supply, there was simply no way they could have continued existing in the numbers that they had been, and they began to die out. Couple this with the fact that their nurseries were probably no longer available, which would have dramatically changed their ability to breed, and the megalodons found themselves to be an antiquated species in a changing world. Extinction followed soon after, and their place at the top of the food chain was taken by smaller species of sharks that didn't need to eat so much and were more tolerant of the lower temperatures. Number 1. Could they be alive today? Ever since people first realized the size and ferocity of Megalodon, the question has been asked of the chances that they're still alive today. When the last fossilized specimen to have been discovered dates back to 2.6 million years ago, this isn't proof in itself that the species died out. So could it be possible that they've been hidden away since then? While it may be a fun or terrifying prospect to think about, the chances that there is still a living megalodon on Earth is extremely remote. There would surely have been teeth found, just like there are with other shark species, and you would expect the remains of prey to have floated to the surface too. Megalodon tended to prefer warmer waters than are found at the poles or deep in the oceans, so it's very unlikely that they've been hiding in such remote places for so long, and they aren't such large creatures that they would have the ability to be continually eating, and there simply aren't enough deep-sea creatures to appease such an appetite without being noticed. The final piece of evidence to support the fact that Megalodon did truly become extinct is our presence and behavior on Earth. We're so active on the oceans and throw so much trash in there that it'd be impossible for such a large animal to stay in a confined space, and it would either be forced to move or have no choice but to take its chances and try to hunt us. The simple fact this hasn't happened a single time is enough proof. They were such a highly aggressive species that there's no reason why they would decide to avoid human contact at all costs, and recent simulations suggest there's less than a 1% chance that there's still a living Megalodon on Earth today. I'll see you guys next time. Thank you to our channel members.